Secretary Yellen, a pleasure to have you. Welcome to Fox.
Thanks so much. Pleasure to be with you.
If I could, maybe you can explain a little. You're looking at this fentanyl trafficking, but apparently directing it right at the source. Drug cartels, particularly a pretty big one. Could you explain?
Yes. Today we levied sanctions on 8 individuals who are part of one of the most vicious Mexican drug cartels responsible for trafficking fentanyl into the United States. And we intend through these actions to try to cut them off, to make their business very difficult or impossible by cutting them off from the U.S. financial system and the dollar. We took this action jointly with the Drug Enforcement Agency and the U.S. attorneys based in Atlanta.
Now, how does this work if some of them are funded through cryptocurrencies and the like? How can you police that?
Well, cryptocurrency, while it's increasing its use, remains a small portion of the activity that finances drug trafficking. And we do have tools to address failure to abide by anti-money laundering and counter CFT, AML CFT obligations. For example, Binance, one of the largest crypto exchanges, we levied sanctions on last year because of their failure to abide by their legal obligations. So we do have tools. We have taken several actions against crypto, those involved in crypto and exchanges. And it's an area where our enforcement tools are imperfect, but they're certainly not non-existent.
All right, so Secretary, you obviously want to freeze the funding, and that is the means by which a lot of these cartels, particularly this big one, operate. So why wasn't this done sooner? It seems like a pretty good idea. Why not sooner?
Well, we've been working jointly with our law enforcement colleagues and also productively with the government of Mexico to amass the information necessary to bring these actions forward. And our work with Mexico has intensified over the last several years. We've had very good cooperation with Mexico.
And does that include the new government under the new president-elect?
I expect us to have a very productive ongoing relationship with the new president as well.
I know the president has already outlined, our president, your boss, Joe Biden, has outlined plans to make it very difficult for those who cross into this country to continue doing so. I am wondering, though, isn't the better solution, and maybe it addresses what you're doing here, Secretary, to just shut down the border entirely, just lock it down? That's what Donald Trump wants to do. What do you say?
Well, you know, my concern today is with fentanyl trafficking, drug trafficking, and I'd say the most effective thing we can do there. But if it's shut down,
you know what I mean, Secretary? If it's shut down entirely, then there goes the trafficking, right?
Well, look, the most impactful tool we have is to put in place sophisticated drug detection equipment. And that's what President Biden has done, is not to shut down the border entirely, but to greatly increase the number of drug detection units. And we've had a massive increase in the amount of drugs that have been detected and interdicted on the border.
You know, Secretary, I notice you're the one leading this charge. It's not Alejandro Mayorkas. I understand the financial tie in here that would involve the Treasury Secretary of the United States and your ample, financial background, the former head of the Fed and all of that. But is it a sign that Alejandro Mayorkas has just damaged goods and they'd rather go to a more reliable, reputable cabinet official?
We each have a role to play. Fentanyl is really something that's caused a national crisis, and since 2000, more than 1 million people have lost their lives because of fentanyl and other synthetic opioids. And it's a human tragedy, and it's a top priority of President Biden to try to address that, and it's an all-of-government effort. We each have a role to play. Homeland Security plays a role, DEA, law enforcement. Treasury's unique capacity with respect to narcotic trafficking has to do with the money channels. Drug trafficking organizations or businesses, they need to receive money to invest the proceeds of their illegal activities and to make payments. And we have the ability to shut them off from the dollar-based financial system. So that's our specialty and where we come into the picture. We work with other agencies.
As Treasury Secretary, also you have commented on Donald Trump's plan for tariffs. Right now, you said that they would trigger stagflation, but your administration has not been shy at targeting China for tariffs on electric vehicle suppliers. So why criticize him when he wants to do the same thing?
Well, let me first say that I'm governed by the Hatch Act and do not want to comment about specific proposals of the candidates. But as a general policy matter, the tariffs that our administration recently put into place on some Chinese goods are carefully targeted. They really only cover presently $18 billion worth of trade, and they're in industries that we are consciously promoting through the Inflation Reduction Act that we think are crucial strategic industries for the United States. Whereas the proposal that I've heard about that President Trump has proposed would be very broad-based tariffs and possibly at very high levels where they would result in very substantial increases in the cost of living and also disadvantage firms that need to import goods in order to produce their own outputs. And so I think those would have a significant stagflationary effect.
You know, you talk about stagflation, all of that. I wonder if you could weigh in, Secretary, on Joe Biden constantly saying, and I don't believe he's ever corrected it, ma'am, that inflation was 9% when he assumed office. And I've talked about this with other economic advisors of the White House, and they find ways to say, well, it was getting there, and that's what he's referring to. But he keeps saying it was 9% when he took office. You're the top money person in the White House, and you know that was not the case. Have you ever tried to pull him aside and say, Mr. President, just so you know, inflation was not that high when you took office?
Well, look, the pandemic had hit the economy, hit America and the world with full force at the time that President Biden assumed office. And
which is why it was so low, right? Which is why it was so low when he took office. So I know the factors behind that and what was going on, and you're quite right to point that out. But he doesn't. He doesn't say that.
Well, inflation hit 9% at its peak.
16 months after he took office. That was
due to inflation was lower before the pandemic. That's absolutely true. And into the pandemic, a year or so, inflation began to pick up because of supply bottlenecks, and later Russia's invasion of Ukraine led to spikes in food and oil prices. It briefly hit 9% and has come down. It's 2/3 down from that peak. And all throughout, we've enjoyed strong economic growth, a robust recovery from the pandemic.
So the trend is your friend, and there are differences of opinion on how what he refers to when he goes 9% when he took office. You're right. 16 months later, it did get that high, but that was under your watch. But having said that, Secretary, you also had a chance to talk about the debt. Now, a number of people thought you had minimized it when you made these remarks. I want you to pay attention to this. Of course, you said it, you know it, but here it is.
I think that if the debt is stabilized relative to the size of the economy, that we're in a reasonable place. The way I look at it is that we should be looking at the real interest cost of the debt. That's really what the burden is.
Now, I think I know what you were getting at, that we're in a reasonable place, given the rate situation where we are, the size of our economy, we can handle this. But you were not referring, or were you, that $34–35 trillion in debt is reasonable?
Well, the ratio of debt to GDP, we have a very large economy, and the ratio of debt to GDP is about 100%, which is high in historical terms, but real interest rates are lower than they have been throughout much of our history. And so right now, the interest burden of the debt is at what I would call normal historical levels. To stay there over the next decade or more, it's necessary to contain deficits and to counter what would otherwise be an increase in the burden of the debt.
But that's not happening, right? I'm not blaming it on you, Secretary. It's not happening, right? I mean, the latest CBO estimate is, we're going to see the deficit climb to about $2 trillion. The debt could be, at another plus 10 years plus at around $50 trillion. I'm just wondering what you make of those figures. They're pretty staggering.
I think it's necessary to contain deficits, and the president's budget is full of proposals to do exactly that. He's proposed $3 trillion in deficit reduction over the next decade, and doing that would be compatible with making investments in the economy that are necessary to support its growth. But we're going to have to let important pieces of the Tax Cut and Job Act expire. The president wants to protect households making under $400,000, but that was a huge deficit increasing tax cut, and it has lowered our tax revenues and resulted in a huge increase in debt. We're going to have to work together on this on a bipartisan basis.
They say Republicans counter, as I'm sure you're aware, Secretary, Republicans counter that your spending, not you specifically, ma'am, your administration's spending has obviously complicated the debt figure. And you mentioned the $3 trillion the president hopes to trim off debt in the next 10 years. That's just off the rate of increase. We'll still be looking at roughly $50 trillion in total debt in the very near future. It just seems like an exploding bomb, and neither party, including the president, is serious about addressing it. What do you think?
The president has taken action to bring down the deficit. He signed $1 trillion in deficit reduction already, and he's put proposals on the table that I think improve tax fairness, are good for working families, that would result in substantial additional deficit reduction. And we need Congress to take these seriously and to enact them.
All right, so just so I can be clear, if the president is reelected, he wants to remove the Trump tax cuts, not extend them. But would that apply to those who did benefit, who are at $400,000 and under?
The president would protect the tax benefits that were received by families making $400,000 or less. But those with higher incomes, he would not want to see benefits from TCJA extended.
All right, so those benefits or those tax cuts would remain, all others would go.
That's right.
Got it. All right.
And he has a number of other proposals that would promote tax fairness by asking high-income individuals and corporations to pay their fair share.
All right, very quickly, if I can, you're very good at numbers and you know them inside and out. And the administration has pointed consistently to improving economic numbers, and indeed they have improved, and inflation has come down from its worst levels. But when he tells the American people that, they don't feel it. They don't agree with that. They still don't like inflation. They don't like what they're seeing at the grocery store. Are you troubled by that some of the improvement you've seen, and the numbers are real, they do show it, people aren't feeling it, and they don't like the way the president seems to lecture them, that it's not that bad. What do you say?
Well, the president has recognized, as I have, that Americans, many American households, are really struggling to cover some of the basic necessities of life, and that ranges from health care to housing to child care to education. And these costs have gone up, frankly, over decades now and are extremely burdensome. And the president has put forward an affordability agenda that's heavily focused on bringing down these costs, putting in place policies like controlling the cost of insulin, bringing down prescription drug prices, making sure that health care is affordable, lowering energy prices for households, programs that will address the high cost of living, make child care more affordable, programs that will help households meet these very burdensome expenses that are really of concern to them.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.